In the frozen mountains of World War II, soldiers survived nights so cold that breath turned to ice. Rifles froze solid, and, well, modern sleeping bags simply failed. What kept many of them alive wasn't comfort, insulation foam, or high-tech fabric. It was a simple, brutal, almost forgotten invention known as the survival tube. This wasn't luxury gear. It was desperation engineering. And, it worked. By the early 1940s, armies across Europe had learned a hard truth. Cold killed faster than bullets. On the Eastern Front, in the Alps, and in Arctic patrol zones, exposure quietly wiped out units before combat ever began. Frostbite crippled hands and feet. Hypothermia stole judgment, then consciousness. Traditional wool blankets and early sleeping bags soaked up moisture, lost heat, and became liabilities. The solution that emerged was not soft, not comfortable, and not designed for sleep in the modern sense. It was designed for survival. The survival tube was essentially a human-sized thermal cocoon. A sealed or semi-sealed tube made from rubberized fabric, treated canvas or oilcloth, sometimes lined with wool felt or fleece. It looked crude. It smelled worse. But it trapped heat in a way nothing else at the time could. Once inside, a soldier's body heat had nowhere to escape. Wind couldn't steal it. Snow couldn't reach it. Moisture stayed contained instead of freezing the sleeper from the outside in. Here's the interesting part. The tube didn't aim to keep soldiers warm. It aimed to stop them from losing heat. That difference matters. In extreme cold, generating warmth is secondary. Preventing heat loss is everything. The tube acted like a vapor barrier decades before the concept became standard in cold weather survival science. By sealing the body off from moving air and external moisture, it slowed heat transfer to a crawl. German mountain troops were among the earliest adopters. Operating in the Alps and later in Norway, they used what was often called a bivy sack, or survival sack, but the design was closer to a tube than a bag. You slid in feet first, pulled it up to the shoulders and cinched it tight. Some versions had a drawstring hood. Others left the head exposed to reduce condensation. Inside, soldiers wore their full cold weather kit. The tube wasn't insulation by itself. It amplified whatever insulation you already had. On the Eastern Front, Soviet forces developed similar solutions. Supplies were scarce, winters were brutal, and survival gear had to be simple. Oilcloth tubes and improvised sacks became common among reconnaissance units and sentries who had to remain stationary for hours. Standing still in sub-zero temperatures is one of the fastest ways to die. Crawling into a tube during rest periods could mean the difference between returning to duty or never waking up. The British and Americans came to the idea slightly later, often learning the hard way. Early United States sleeping bags were bulky, heavy, and, well, notoriously ineffective when wet. In places like the Italian Apennines and later during the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers began using waterproof bivouac covers as emergency cocoons. These weren't yet standardized survival tubes, but the principle was the same. Seal the body, block the wind, hold the heat. Now, this is where things get clever. The survival tube didn't just work at night. It was used during artillery bombardments, long-range patrol halts, and even medical evacuations. Wounded soldiers were wrapped in tubes to prevent shock and hypothermia. Medics quickly noticed that patients enclosed in these sacks had better survival rates in cold conditions. Again, not because they were warm, but because they stopped losing warmth. Condensation was the trade-off. Inside a sealed tube, moisture builds fast. Sweat, breath, and damp clothing create a humid microclimate. In modern gear, that's managed with breathable membranes. In World War II, it wasn't. Soldiers learned to vent the tube periodically or leave the opening slightly loose. It was uncomfortable, sometimes clammy, but alive beats comfortable every time. What made the survival tube so effective was its brutal simplicity. There were no zippers to freeze, no padding to compress, and no complex structure to fail. If it tore, well, it could just be patched. If it soaked through, it still managed to block the wind. Even if the insulation got wet, the tube slowed heat loss enough to prevent catastrophe. In survival terms, it was resilient. And, resilience matters more than perfection. This idea didn't disappear after the war. Instead, it evolved quietly over time. Modern bivy sacks, emergency thermal shelters, and even those space blankets all trace their logic back to this concept. The military survival tube proved that in extreme environments, your body is the heat source. The job of your gear isn't really to add warmth, but to keep what you already have. For survival enthusiasts today, the lesson is both powerful and practical. You don't actually need a thick sleeping bag to survive the cold. What you need is wind protection, moisture control, and a way to trap still air around your body. That's the reason experienced cold weather hikers still carry vapor barrier liners. It's why emergency shelters always prioritize enclosure over comfort. And it's why, in true emergencies, even a plastic sheet wrapped tightly around the body can save a life. The soldiers who relied on these tubes didn't romanticize them. They complained about them. They cursed them. But, they trusted them. When temperatures dropped and the world went silent under snow, crawling into that narrow cocoon meant waking up the next morning. By the end of the war, the survival tube had quietly proven its value across multiple armies and climates. It never became a flashy symbol of victory. It didn't win medals. But, it saved thousands of lives in conditions where technology had failed and nature was merciless. And that's the real legacy here. Survival history isn't built on comfort. It's built on small, clever ideas that work when everything else breaks. The World War II survival tube was one of those ideas. Simple, ugly, effective. So, the next time you think survival is about the latest gear or the thickest insulation, remember this. In the coldest places on Earth, soldiers once survived inside little more than a sealed sack and their own body heat. No electricity, no synthetics, just smart design and hard-earned knowledge. If you enjoy uncovering forgotten survival solutions like this, make sure to subscribe to Legacy of Survival. Like the video if this story surprised you, and share it with someone who thinks modern gear invented everything. History still has a lot to teach us, and honestly, we're just getting started.